Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family. Faye, Martin, Karis, Mike, and Stinky Pants McDumdum. Thank you all for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes, fictional works, and collections found nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip. No subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's relax with more advice about navigating the world with grace and politeness. We're reading Etiquette in Society, in Business, in Politics, and at Home by Emily Post, author of Purple and Fine Linen, The Title Market, Woven in the Tapestry, The Flight of a Moth, etc., etc. Illustrated with private photographs and facsimiles of social forms. First published in 1922 by Funk and Wagnalls Company, New York and London. Let's pick up right where we left off in the middle of Chapter 12, The Well-Appointed House. Let's begin. The Housekeeper. In a very big house, the housekeeper usually lives in the house. Smaller establishments often have a visiting housekeeper who comes for as long as she is needed each morning. The resident housekeeper has her own bedroom and bath and sitting room always. Her meals are brought to her by an especial kitchen maid, called in big houses the hall girl, or occasionally the butler details an underfootman to that duty. In an occasional house, all the servants, the gardener as well as the cook and butler and nurses, come under the housekeeper's authority. In other words, she superintends the entire house, exactly as a very conscientious and skilled mistress would do herself, if she gave her whole time and attention to it. She engages the servants, and if necessary dismisses them. She sees the cook, orders meals, goes to the market, or at least supervises the cook's market orders, and likewise engages and apportions the work of the men servants. Ordinarily, however, she is in charge of no one but the housemaids, parlor maids, useful man, and one of the scullery maids. The cook, butler, nurses, and lady's maid do not come under her supervision. But should difficulties arise between herself and them, it would be within her province to ask for their dismissal, which would probably be granted, since she would not ask without grave cause that involved much more than her personal dislike. A good housekeeper is always a woman of experience and tact, and often a lady. Friction is therefore extremely rare. The organization of a great house. The management of a house of greatest size is divided usually into several distinct departments, each under its separate head. The housekeeper has charge of the appearance of the house and of its contents, the manners and looks of the housemaids and parlor maids, as well as their work in cleaning walls, floors, furniture, pictures, ornaments, books, and taking care of linen. The butler has charge of the pantry and dining room. He engages all footmen, apportions their work, and is responsible for their appearance, manners, and efficiency. The cook is in charge of the kitchen, undercook, and kitchen maids. The nurse and the personal maid and cook are under the direction of the lady of the house. The butler and the valet, as well as the chauffeur and gardener, are engaged by the gentleman of the house. The butler. The butler is not only the most important servant in every big establishment, but it is by no means unheard of for him to be in supreme command, not only as steward but as housekeeper as well. At the Worldleys, for instance, Hastings, who is actually the butler, orders all the supplies, keeps the household accounts, and engages not only the men servants but the housemaids, parlor maids, and even the chef. But normally in a great house, the butler has charge of his own department only, and his own department is the dining room and pantry, or possibly the whole parlor floor. In all smaller establishments, the butler is always the valet, and in many great ones, he is valet to his employer, even though he details a footman to look after other gentlemen of the family or visitors. In a small house, the butler works a great deal with his hands and not so much with his head. In a great establishment, the butler works very much with his head, and with his hands not at all. At Golden Hall, where guests come in dozens at a time, both in the house and the guest annex, his stewardship, even though there is a housekeeper, is not a job which a small man can fill. He has perhaps 30 men under him at big dinners, 10 who belong under him in the house always. He has the keys to the wine cellar and the combination of the silver safe, the former being in this day by far the greater responsibility. He also chooses the china and glass and linen, as well as the silver to be used each day, oversees the setting of the table and the serving of all food. When there is a house party, every breakfast tray that leaves the pantry is first approved by him. At all meals he stands behind the chair of the lady of the house, in other words, at the head of the table. In occasional houses, the butler stands at the opposite end, as he is supposed to be better able to see any directions given him. At Golden Hall, the butler stands behind Mr. Gilding, but at great estates, Hastings invariably stands behind Mrs. Worldley's chair, so that at the slightest turn of her head, he need only take a step to be within reach of her voice. The husband, by the way, is head of the house, but the wife is head of the table. At tea time, he oversees the footmen who place the tea table, put on the tea cloth, and carry in the tea tray. after which Hastings himself places the individual tables. When there is no dinner at home, he waits in the hall and assists Mr. Worldly into his coat, and hands him his hat and stick, which had previously been handed to the butler by one of the footmen. The butler in a smaller house. In a smaller house, the butler also takes charge of the wines and silver, does very much the same as the butler in the bigger house, except that he has less overseeing of others and more work to do himself. Where he is alone, he does all the work, naturally. Where he has either one footman or a parlor maid, he passes the main courses at the table, and his assistant passes the secondary dishes. He is also valet not only for the gentlemen of the house, but for any gentleman guests as well. What the butler wears. The butler never wears the livery of a footman, and on no account knee breeches or powder. In the early morning, he wears an ordinary sack suit, black or very dark blue, with a dark, inconspicuous tie. For luncheon or earlier, if he is on duty at the door, he wears black trousers with gray stripes, a double-breasted high-cut black waistcoat, and black swallowtail coat without satin on the reverse, a white stiff-bosomed shirt with standing collar, and a black four-in-hand tie. In fashionable houses, the butler does not put on his dress suit until 6 o'clock. The butler's evening dress differs from that of a gentleman in a few details only. He has no braid on his trousers, and the satin on his lapels, if any, is narrower. But the most distinctive difference is that a butler wears a black waistcoat and a white lawn tie, and a gentleman always wears a white waistcoat with a white tie, or a white waistcoat and a black tie with a dinner coat, but never the reverse. Unless he is an old-time servant in the South, a butler who wears a dress suit in the daytime is either a hired waiter who has come in to serve a meal, or he has never been employed by persons of position. And it is unnecessary to add that none but vulgarians would employ a butler or any other house servant who wears a mustache. To have him open the door collarless and in shirt sleeves is scarcely worse. A butler never wears gloves, nor a flower in his buttonhole. He sometimes wears a very thin watch chain in the daytime, but none at night. He never wears a scarf pin or any jewelry that is for ornament alone. His cufflinks should be as plain as possible, and his shirt studs white enamel ones that look like linen. The house footman. All house servants who assist in waiting on the table come under the direction of the butler and are known as footmen. One who never comes into the dining room is known as a useful man. The duties of the footman and useful man include cleaning the dining room, pantry, lower hall, entrance vestibule, sidewalk, attending to the furnace, carrying coal to the kitchen, wood to all the open fireplaces in the house, cleaning the windows, cleaning brasses, cleaning all boots, carrying everything that is heavy, moving furniture for the parlor maids to clean behind it, valeting all gentlemen, setting and waiting on table, attending the front door, telephoning and writing down messages, and incessantly and ceaselessly cleaning and polishing silver. In a small house, the butler polishes silver, but in a very big house, one of the footmen is silver specialist and does nothing else. Nothing. If there is to be a party of any sort, he puts on his livery and joins the others who line the hall and bring dishes to the table, but he does not assist in setting the table or washing dishes or in cleaning anything whatsoever except silver. The butler also usually answers the telephone. If not, it is answered by the first footman. The first footman is deputy butler. The footmen also take turns in answering the door. In houses of great ceremony, like those of the Worldleys and the Gildings, there are always 2 footmen at the door if anyone is to be admitted, one to open the door and the other to conduct a guest into the drawing room. But if formal company is expected, the butler himself is in the front hall, with 1 or 2 footmen at the door. The footman's livery. People who have big houses usually choose a color for their livery and never change it. Maroon and buff, for instance, are the colors of the Gildings. All their motor cars are maroon, with buff lines and cream-colored or maroon linings. The chauffeurs and outside footmen wear maroon liveries. The house footmen for every day wear ordinary footmen's liveries, maroon trousers, and long-tailed coats with brass buttons, and maroon and buff-striped waistcoats. For gala occasions, Mrs. Gilding adds as many caterers' men as necessary, but they are all dressed in her full-dress livery, consisting of a court coat, which comes together at the neck in front, and then cuts away to long tails at the back. The coat is of maroon broadcloth, with frogs and epaulets of black braiding. There is a small standing collar of buff cloth and a falling cravat of pleated cream-colored lace worn in front. The waistcoat is of buff satin, the breeches of black satin, cream-colored stockings, pumps, and the hair is powdered. It is first pomaded and then thickly powdered. Wigs are never worn. Mrs. Worldley, however, compromises between the court footman and the ordinary one, and puts her footmen in green cloth coats, cut like the everyday liveries, with silver buttons on which the crest is raised in relief, but adds black velvet collars and black satin waistcoats in place of the everyday striped ones, black satin knee breeches, black silk stockings, and pumps with silver buckles, and their ordinary hair cut short. The powdered footman's court livery is, as a matter of fact, very rarely seen. 3 or 4 houses in New York, and 1 or 2 otherwhere, would very likely include them all. Knee breeches are more usual, but even those are seen in none but very lavish houses. To choose servants who are naturally well-groomed is more important than putting them in smart liveries. Men must be close-shaven and have their hair well cut. Their linen must be immaculate, their shoes polished, their clothes brushed and in press, and their fingernails clean and well cared for. If a man's fingers are indelibly stained, he would better wear white cotton gloves. The cook. The kitchen is always in charge of the cook. In a small house or in an apartment, she is alone and has all the cooking, cleaning of kitchen and larder to do, the basement or kitchen bell to answer, and the servants' table to set and their dishes to wash as well as her kitchen utensils. In a bigger house, the kitchen maid lights the kitchen fire and does all cleaning of kitchen and pots and pans, answers the basement bell, sets the servants' table, and washes the servants' table dishes. In a still bigger house, the second cook cooks for the servants always, and for the children sometimes, and assists the cook by preparing certain plainer portions of the meals, the cook preparing all dinner dishes, sauces, and the more elaborate items on the menu. Sometimes there are 2 or more kitchen maids, who merely divide the greater amount of work between them. In most houses of any size, the cook does all the marketing. She sees the lady of the house every morning and submits menus for the day. In smaller houses, the lady does the ordering of both supplies and menus. How a cook submits the menu. In a house of largest size, at the Gildings for instance, the chef writes in his book every evening the menus for the next day, whether there is to be company or not. None, of course, if the family are to be out for all meals. This book is sent up to Mrs. Gilding with her breakfast tray. It is a loose-leaf blank book of rather large size. The day's menu sheet is on top, but the others are left in their proper sequence underneath, so that by looking at her engagement book to see who dined with her on such a date, and then looking at the menu for that same date, she knows, if she cares to, exactly what the dinner was. If she does not like the chef's choice, she draws a pencil through and writes in something else. If she has any orders or criticisms to make, she writes them on an envelope pad, folds the page and seals it, and puts the note in the book. If the menu is to be changed, the chef rewrites it. If not, the page is left as it is, and the book put in a certain place in the kitchen. The butler always goes into the kitchen shortly after the book has come down, and copies the day's menus on a pad of his own. From this, he knows what table utensils will be needed. This system is not necessary in medium-sized or small houses, but where there is a great deal of entertaining, it is much simpler for the butler to be able to go and see for himself than to ask the cook and forget, and ask again and the cook forget, and then disturbance because the butler did not send down the proper silver dishes, or have the proper plates ready, or had others heated unnecessarily. The kitchen maid. The kitchen maids are under the direction of the cook, except one known colloquially as the hall girl, who is supervised by the housekeeper. She is evidently a survival of the between maid of the English house. Her sobriquet comes from the fact that she has charge of the servants' hall or dining room, and is in fact the waitress for them. She also takes care of the housekeeper's rooms, and carries all her meals up to her. If there is no housekeeper, the hall girl is under the direction of the cook. The parlor maid. The parlor maid keeps the drawing room and library in order. The useful man brings up the wood for the fireplaces, but the parlor maid lays the fire. In some houses, the parlor maid takes up the breakfast trays. In other houses, the butler does this himself and then hands them to the lady's maid, who takes them into the bedrooms. The windows and the brasses are cleaned by the useful man, and heavy furniture moved by him, so she can clean behind them. The parlor maid assists the butler in waiting at table and washing dishes, and takes turns with him in answering the door and the telephone. In huge houses like the Worldleys and the Gildings, the footmen assist the butler in the dining room and at the door, and there is always a pantry maid who washes dishes and cleans the pantry. The housemaid. The housemaid does all the chamber work, cleans all silver on dressing tables, polishes fixtures in the bathroom. In other words, takes care of the bedroom floors. In a bigger house, the head housemaid has charge of the linen and does the bedrooms of the lady and gentleman of the house, and a few of the spare rooms. The second housemaid does the nurseries, extra spare rooms, and the servants' floor. The bigger the establishment, the more housemaids, and the work is further divided. The housemaid is by many people called the chambermaid. Uniforms. In all houses of importance and fashion, the parlor maid and the housemaids and the waitress, where there is no butler, are all dressed alike. Their work dresses are of plain cambric, and in whatever the house color may be, with large white aprons with high bibs and Eton collars, but no cuffs, as they must be able to unbutton their sleeves and turn them up. Those who serve in the dining room must always dress before lunch, and the afternoon dresses vary according to taste and purse of the lady of the house. Where no uniforms are supplied, each maid is supposed to furnish herself with a plain black dress for afternoon, on which she wears collars and cuffs of embroidered muslin usually, always supplied her, and a small afternoon apron, with or without shoulder straps, and with or without a cap. In very beautifully done houses, all the dresses of the maids are furnished them. The color of the uniforms is chosen to harmonize with the dining room. At the Gildings, for instance, where there are no men servants because Mr. Gilding does not like them, but where the house is as perfect as a picture on the stage, the waitress and parlor maid wear in the blue and yellow dining room dresses of nuttier blue taffeta, with aprons and collars and cuffs of plain, hem-stitched cream-colored organdy that is as transparent as possible, blue stockings and patent leather slippers with silver buckles, their hair always beautifully smooth. Sometimes they wear caps, and sometimes not, depending upon the waitress's appearance. 20 years ago, every maid in a lady's house wore a cap, except the personal maid, who wore and still does a velvet bow or nothing. But when every little slattern in every sloppy household had a small mat of whitish Swiss pinned somewhere on an untidy head, and was decked out in as many yards of embroidery ruffling on her apron and shoulders as her person could carry, fashionable ladies began taking caps and trimmings off, and exacting instead that clothes be good in cut and hair be neatly arranged. A few ladies of great taste dressed their maids according to individual becomingness. Some faces look well under a cap, others look the contrary. A maid whose hair is rather fluffy, especially if it is dark, looks pretty in a cap, particularly of the coronet variety. No one looks well in a doily laid flat. But fluffy fair hair with a small mat tilted up against a knot of hair, dressed high, can look very smart. A young woman whose hair is straight and rebellious to order can be made to look tidy and even attractive in a headdress that encircles the whole head. A good one for this purpose is a very narrow ruche from 9 to 18 inches long on either side of a long black velvet ribbon. The ruche goes part way or all the way around the head, and the velvet ribbon ties with streamers hanging down the back. On the other hand, many extremely pretty young women with hair worn flat do not look well in caps of any description, except Dutch ones, which are in most houses too suggestive of fancy dress. If no caps are worn, the hair must be faultlessly smooth and neat. And of course, where 2 or more maids are seen together, they must be alike. It would not do to have one wear a cap and the other not. The lady's maid. A first-class lady's maid is required to be a hairdresser, a good packer, and an expert needlewoman. Her first duty is to keep her lady's clothes in order and to help her dress and undress. She draws the bath, lays out underclothes, always brushes her lady's hair and usually dresses it, and gets out the dress to be worn as well as the stockings, shoes, hat, veil, gloves, wrist bag, parasol, or whatever accessories go with the dress in question. As soon as the lady is dressed, everything that has been worn is taken to the sewing room, and each article is gone over, carefully brushed if of woolen material, cleaned if silk. Everything that is must is pressed. Everything that can be suspected of not being immaculate is washed or cleaned with cleaning fluid, and when in perfect order, is replaced where it belongs in the closet. Underclothes as mended are put in the clothes hamper. Stockings are looked over for rips or small holes, and the maid usually washes very fine stockings herself, also lace collars or small pieces of lace trimming. Some maids have to wait up at night, no matter how late, until their ladies return. But as many, if not more, are never asked to wait longer than a certain hour. But the maid for a debutante in the height of the season, between the inevitable go-fetching at this place and that, and mending of party dresses danced to ribbons and soiled by partners' hands on the back, and slippers walked on until there is quite as much black part as satin or metal, has no cynosure. Why 2 maids? In very important houses, where mother and daughters go out a great deal, there are usually 2 maids, one for the mother and one for the daughters. But even in moderate households it is seldom practical for a debutante and her mother to share a maid, at least during the height of the season. That a maid who has to go out night after night for weeks and even months on end, and sit in the dressing rooms at balls until 4 and 5 and even 6 in the morning, is then allowed to go to bed and to sleep until luncheon is merely humane. And it can easily be seen that it is more likely that she will need the help of a seamstress to refurbish dance frocks than that she will have any time to devote to her young lady's mother, who in mid-season therefore is forced to have a maid of her own, ridiculous as it sounds, that 2 maids for 2 ladies should be necessary. Sometimes this is overcome by engaging an especial maid by the evening to go to parties and wait, and bring the debutante home again. and the maid at home can then be made for two. Dress of a lady's maid. A lady's maid wears a black skirt, a laundered white waist, and a small white apron, the band of which buttons in the back. In traveling, a lady's maid always wears a small black silk apron, and some maids wear black taffeta ones always. In the afternoon, she puts on a black waist with white collar and cuffs. Mrs. Gilding, Jr. puts her maid in black taffeta with embroidered collar and cuffs. For company occasions, when she waits in the dressing room, she wears light gray taffeta with a very small embroidered mull apron with a narrow black velvet waist ribbon and collar and cuffs of mull to match, which is extremely pretty, but also extremely extravagant. The valet. The valet, pronounced valet, not valet, is what Beau Brummel called a gentleman's gentleman. His duties are exactly the same as those of the lady's maid, except that he does not sew. He keeps his employer's clothes in perfect order, brushes, cleans, and presses everything as soon as it has been worn, even if only for a few moments. He lays out the clothes to be put on, puts away everything that is a personal belonging. Some gentlemen like their valet to help them dress, run the bath, shave them, and hold each article in readiness as it is to be put on. But most gentlemen merely like their clothes laid out for them, which means that trousers have belts or braces attached, shirts have cufflinks and studs, and waistcoat buttons are put in. The valet also unpacks the bags of any gentlemen guests when they come, valets them while there, and packs them when they go. He always packs for his own gentlemen, buys tickets, looks after the luggage, and makes himself generally useful as a personal attendant, whether at home or when traveling. At big dinners, he is required, much against his will, to serve as a footman, in a footman's, not a butler's, livery. The valet wears no livery except on such occasions. His uniform is an ordinary business suit, dark and inconspicuous in color, with a black tie. In a bachelor's quarters, a valet is often general factotum, not only valeting, but performing the services of cook, butler, and even housemaid. The nurse. Everybody knows the nurse is either the comfort or the torment of the house. Everyone also knows innumerable young mothers who put up with inexcusable crankiness from a crotchety middle-aged woman because she was so wonderful to the baby. And here let it be emphasized that such a one usually turns out to have been not wonderful to the baby at all. That she does not actually abuse a helpless infant is merely granting that she is not a monster. Devotion must always be unselfish. The nurse who is really wonderful to the baby is pretty sure to be a person who is kind generally. In 99 cases out of 100, the sooner a domineering nurse, old or young, is got rid of, the better. It has been the experience of many a mother whose life has been made perfectly miserable through her belief that if she dismissed the tyrant, the baby would suffer. That in the end, there is always an end. The baby was quite as relieved as the rest of the family when the right sort of a kindly and humane person took the tyrant's place. It is unnecessary to add that one cannot be too particular in asking for a nurse's reference, and in never failing to get a personal one from the lady she is leaving. Not only is it necessary to have a sweet-tempered, competent, and clean person, but her moral character is of utmost importance, since she is to be the constant and inseparable companion of the children, whose whole lives are influenced by her example, especially where busy parents give only a small portion of time to their children. Courtesy to one's household. In a dignified house, a servant is never spoken to as Jim, Maisie, or Katie, but always as James, or Margaret, or Catherine. And a butler is called by his last name nearly always. The worldly's butler, for instance, is called Hastings, not John. In England, a lady's maid is also called by her last name, and the cook, if married, is addressed as Mrs. And the nurse is always called nurse. A chef is usually called chef, or else by his last name. Always abroad, and every really well-bred lady or gentleman here says please in asking that something be brought her or him. Please get me the book I left on the table in my room, or please give me some bread, or some bread, please. Or one can say equally politely and omit the please, I'd like some toast, but it is usual and instinctive to every lady or gentleman to add please. In refusing a dish at the table, one must say no thank you, or no thanks, or else one shakes one's head. A head can be shaken politely or rudely. To be courteously polite and yet keep one's walls up is a thing every thoroughbred person knows how to do, and a thing that everyone who is trying to become such must learn to do. A rule can't be given because there isn't any. As said in another chapter, a well-bred person always lives within the walls of his personal reserve. A vulgarian has no walls, or at least none that do not collapse at the slightest touch. But those who think they appear superior by being rude to others, whom fortune has placed below them, might as well, did they but know it, shout their own unexalted origin to the world at large, since by no other method could it be more widely published. The house with limited service. The fact that you live in a house with 2 servants or in an apartment with only 1 need not imply that your house lacks charm or even distinction, or that it is not completely the home of a lady or gentleman. But as explained in the chapter on dinners, if you have limited service, you must devise systematic economy of time and labor, or you will have disastrous consequences. Every person, after all, has only 1 pair of hands, and a day has only so many hours. And one thing is inevitable, which young housekeepers are apt to forget. A few cannot do the work of many, and do it in the same way. It is all very well if the housemaid cannot get into young Mrs. Gilding's room until lunchtime, nor does it matter if its confusion looks like the aftermath of a cyclone. The housemaid has nothing to do with the rest of the day but put that 1 room and bath in order. But in young Mrs. Gailey's small house, where the housemaid is also the waitress, who is supposed to be dressed for lunch, it does not have to be pointed out that she cannot sweep, dust, tidy up rooms, wash out bathtubs, polish fixtures, and at the same time be dressed in afternoon clothes. If Mrs. Gailey is out for lunch, it is true the chambermaid waitress need not be dressed to wait on table, but her thoughtless young mistress would not be amiable if a visitor were to ring the doorbell in the early afternoon and have it opened by a maid in a rumpled working dress. Supposing the time to put the bedroom in order is from 10 to 11 each morning, it is absolutely necessary that Mrs. Gailey take her bath before 10, so that even if she is not otherwise dressed, she can be out of her bedroom and bath at 10 o'clock promptly. She can go elsewhere while her room is done up and then come back and finish dressing later. In this case, she must herself tidy any disorder that she makes in dressing, put away her negligee and slippers, and put back anything out of place. On the days when Mr. Gailey does not go to the office, he too must get up and out, so that the house can be put in order. The one maid alone. But where one maid alone cooks, cleans, waits on table, and furthermore serves as lady's maid and valet, she must necessarily be limited in the performance of each of these duties in direct proportion to their number. Even though she be eagerly willing, quality must give way before quantity produced with the same equipment, or if quality is necessary, then quantity must give way. In the house of a fashionable gay couple like the Lovejoys, for instance, the time spent in maiding or valeting has to be taken from cleaning or cooking. Besides cleaning and cooking, the one maid in their small apartment can press out Mrs. Lovejoy's dresses and do a little mending, but she cannot sit down and spend 1 or 2 hours going over a dress in the way a specialist maid can. Either Mrs. Lovejoy herself must do the sewing or the housework, or one or the other must be left undone. The management of servants. It is certainly a greater pleasure and incentive to work for those who are appreciative than for those who continually find fault. Everyone who did war work cannot fail to remember how easy it was to work for or with some people, and how impossible to get anything done for others. And just as the heads of workrooms or wards or canteens were either stimulating or dispiriting, so must they and their types also be to those who serve in their households. This perhaps explains why some people are always having a servant problem, finding servants difficult to get, more difficult to keep, and most difficult to get efficient work from. It is a question whether the servant problem is not more often a mistress problem. It must be, because if you notice, those who have woes and complaints are invariably the same, just as others who never have any trouble are also the same. It does not depend on the size of the house. The Lovejoys never have any trouble, and yet their one maid of all work has a far from easy place. And a vacancy at Brook Meadows is always sought after, even though the old names spend 10 months of the year in the country. Neither is there any friction at the Golden Hall or Great Estates, even though the latter house is run by the butler, an almost inevitable cause of trouble. These houses represent a difference in range of from 1 alone to nearly 40 on the household payroll. Those who have persistent trouble. It might be well for those who have trouble to remember a few rules which are often overlooked. Justice must be the foundation upon which every tranquil house is constructed. Work must be as evenly divided as possible. One servant should not be allowed liberties not accorded to all. It is not just to be too lenient, any more than it is just to be unreasonably strict. To allow impertinence or sloppy work is inexcusable. But it is equally inexcusable to show causeless irritability, or to be overbearing or rude, and there is no greater example of injustice than to reprimand those about you because you happen to be in a bad humor, and at another time overlook offenses that are greater because you are in an amiable mood. There is also no excuse for correcting either a servant or a child before people. And when you do correct, do not forget to make allowances if there be any reason why allowance should be made. If you live in a palace like Golden Hall or any completely equipped house of important size, you overlook nothing. There is no more excuse for delinquency than there is in the army. If anything happens, such as illness of one servant, there is another to take his or her place. A huge household is a machine, and it is the business of the engineers, in other words, the secretary, housekeeper, chef, or butler, to keep it going perfectly. But in a little house, it may not be fair to say, "Selma, the silver is dirty," when there is a hot air furnace, and you have had company to every meal, and you have perhaps sent her on errands between times, and she has literally not had a moment. If you don't know whether she has had time or not, you could give her the benefit of the doubt and say, trustfully, not haughtily, "You have not had time to clean the silver, have you?" This, in case she has really been unable to clean it, points out just as well the fact that it is not shining, but is not a criticism. Carelessness, on the other hand, when you know she has had plenty of time, should never be overlooked. Another type that has difficulties is the distrustful, sometimes actually suspicious person who locks everything tight and treats all those with whom she comes in contact as though they were meddlesomely curious at least, or at worst dishonest. It is impossible to overstate the misfortune of this temperament. The servant who is watched for fear she won't work, listened to for fear she may be gossiping, suspected of wanting to take a liberty of some sort, or of doing something else she shouldn't do, is psychologically encouraged, almost driven, to do these very things. The perfect mistress expects perfect service, but it never occurs to her that perfect service will not be voluntarily and gladly given. She, on her part, shows all of those in her employ the consideration and trust due them, as honorable, self-respecting, and conscientious human beings. If she has reason to think they are not all this, a lady does not keep them in her house. And with that excellent advice, I think we'll end this evening's reading from Etiquette by Emily Post. Her description of the household is interesting when we consider what Mrs. Beeton had to say about the same thing 60 years earlier. It doesn't seem like very much changed, except for the introduction of a telephone. I hope you enjoyed that. If you'd like to read this work for yourself, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.